On a seemingly ordinary day in 2025, the President of the United States issued a threat that sent shockwaves across the African continent and the international community. Military action, aid cutoffs, accusations of genocide. The target? Nigeria, Africa's most populous nation, its largest economy, and a key ally in the fight against terrorism. But here's what makes this story truly explosive. The facts on the ground tell a completely different story than the one being told in Washington. This isn't just a diplomatic spat, this is a clash between political narrative and reality, with millions of lives hanging in the balance. So what's really happening in Nigeria? Is there actually a Christian genocide? Why is the U.S. threatening military intervention? And what does this mean for the future of U.S.-Africa relations? Today we're doing a complete deep dive into the 2025 Nigeria-U.S. crisis. We're going to break down the accusations, examine the evidence, hear from both sides, and most importantly, uncover what's actually happening on the ground in Nigeria. This is a complex story with no easy answers, but by the end of this video, you'll understand the full picture that mainstream media isn't showing you. So grab a coffee, settle in, and let's get into it. Let me take you back to the moment this crisis began. It's early 2025, and President Donald Trump is in the Oval Office, preparing to make an announcement that will fundamentally alter America's relationship with one of its key African partners. The announcement comes through an official White House statement, and it's stunning in its directness and severity. Trump declares Nigeria a country of particular concern for religious freedom violations. Now, this designation isn't just symbolic, it's a formal classification that puts Nigeria in the same category as countries like North Korea, China, and Iran when it comes to religious persecution. But Trump doesn't stop there. He makes several explosive claims. First, he accuses the Nigerian government of allowing, and I quote, the killing of Christians by Islamic extremists. He paints a picture of systematic persecution, Christians being hunted down, churches being burned, entire communities under siege. Second, he claims the Nigerian government isn't doing enough to stop this violence. The implication? That Nigeria is either complicit or incompetent, possibly both. Third, and this is where it gets truly unprecedented, he orders the Pentagon to prepare for potential military action. Not economic sanctions. Not diplomatic pressure. Military action. Against a sovereign nation. Against an ally. The threat is backed up with concrete action items. Trump announces plans to immediately halt all U.S. aid to Nigeria unless the situation changes. We're talking about over $1 billion in annual assistance, funding that goes toward healthcare, education, development programs, and crucially, counterterrorism efforts. The message from Washington is clear: fix this problem or face the consequences. It's diplomacy by ultimatum, and it's playing out on the world stage. The reaction is immediate and intense. Social media explodes. International news organizations scramble to cover the story. Human rights organizations weigh in. Religious leaders on both sides of the Atlantic start making statements. And in Nigeria itself, the response is one of shock, anger, and defiance. Within hours of Trump's announcement, Nigerian President Bola Tinubu convenes an emergency meeting with his national security team and cabinet. The response, when it comes, is carefully worded but unmistakably firm. Tinubu releases a statement that directly challenges Trump's characterization. And here's the key quote: "This is important. The characterization of Nigeria as religiously intolerant does not reflect our national reality. Nigeria is a multi-religious, multi-ethnic nation where Christians and Muslims have coexisted for generations, often within the same families and communities." Tinubu goes on to emphasize that Nigeria's government is committed to protecting the religious freedom and safety of all citizens, not just Christians, not just Muslims, but everyone. He points to the diversity of his own cabinet and security forces as evidence. But the strongest pushback comes from Nigeria's Foreign Affairs Ministry. Their spokesman makes an unequivocal declaration: there is no Christian genocide in Nigeria. Now, this is a bold statement, and Nigeria backs it up with specific arguments. Let me break down their position. Point 1. The violence in Nigeria is not religiously motivated persecution. It's a complex security crisis involving multiple armed groups with different motivations: terrorism, criminality, resource conflicts, and political instability. Point 2. The victims of this violence include Muslims, Christians, and followers of traditional religions. The attackers don't discriminate based on faith, they target vulnerability and opportunity. Point 3. The Nigerian government is actively fighting these armed groups. Thousands of troops are deployed in conflict zones. Significant portions of the national budget go towards security operations. Saying the government is allowing this to happen, Nigeria argues, ignores these massive ongoing efforts. And point 4. This is a sovereignty issue. Nigeria is a democratic nation with its own government, military, and institutions. Trump's threat of military intervention from Nigeria's perspective is a violation of international norms and a dangerous precedent. Okay, so we've heard from both sides. Trump says there's Christian persecution and genocide. Nigeria says there's no genocide and the violence is indiscriminate. So what's actually happening on the ground? This is where we need to slow down and really dig into the facts, because the reality is far more complex than either side's talking points suggest. And understanding this complexity is crucial to understanding why this crisis matters and what it means for the future. Nigeria is massive, 200 million people, over 250 ethnic groups, roughly split between Christians and Muslims, with traditional religions also practiced. It's not a monolith. Different regions face different challenges. Let me walk you through the actual security situation, region by region. First, the Northeast. This is where Boko Haram and its offshoot, Islamic State West Africa Province, or ISWAP, operate. These are internationally recognized terrorist organizations. They've been active since 2009, and their violence has killed tens of thousands and displaced millions. Now, Boko Haram does have an Islamic extremist ideology. They've attacked churches, killed Christians, and forced conversions. These are documented facts. So on the surface, this seems to support Trump's narrative, right? But here's the critical detail that changes everything. Boko Haram and ISWAP also attack Muslims. Extensively. The majority of their victims are actually Muslim, because the majority of the population in northeastern Nigeria is Muslim. They've bombed mosques during Friday prayers. They've killed imams and Islamic scholars. They've declared many mainstream Muslims as apostates and targeted them for death. Their ideology is extreme and violent, and it threatens everyone, Muslim and Christian alike. Now let's move to northwestern Nigeria. This region faces a different threat: armed bandit groups. These are essentially criminal organizations, think cartels or mafia groups operating in rural areas. These bandits engage in kidnapping for ransom, cattle rustling, village raids, and highway robbery. Their motivation isn't religious, it's economic. They attack whoever has something valuable or whoever is vulnerable, regardless of faith. The Middle Belt region faces yet another type of conflict: clashes between farming communities and herding communities over land and water resources. This is often described in religious terms because many farmers are Christian and many herders are Muslim Fulani, but experts agree the root cause is resource scarcity, not religious hatred. Climate change has pushed herders further south seeking grazing land and water. This brings them into conflict with farmers whose land they cross. Tensions escalate. Violence erupts. Both communities suffer casualties. Over 3 million people have been displaced from their homes. Entire communities have been uprooted. Children have grown up knowing nothing but conflict and displacement. And here's the key point. These casualties include Muslims, Christians, and others. The violence is widespread and indiscriminate. Yes, Christians are being killed. But so are Muslims. So are animists. So are people whose only crime was being in the wrong place at the wrong time. So if the situation is this complex, why is Trump calling it Christian persecution? Where does this narrative come from? This is a crucial question, because understanding the answer helps us understand how international conflicts get misunderstood and mischaracterized. Several factors contribute to this disconnect between perception and reality. First, there's selective reporting. Western media and advocacy organizations often focus specifically on Christian victims. This isn't necessarily malicious. Many of these organizations are Christian humanitarian groups, so they naturally focus on threats to Christian communities. Organizations like Open Doors, Voice of the Martyrs, and Christian Solidarity Worldwide do important work documenting persecution of Christians globally. Second, there's the Boko Haram factor. Because Boko Haram explicitly has an Islamic extremist ideology and has attacked churches, it's easy to frame the entire Nigerian security crisis through this lens. But Boko Haram is just one piece of a much larger puzzle. Third, and we can't ignore this, there are political motivations. Trump's evangelical Christian base in the United States cares deeply about persecution of Christians abroad. Fourth, there's what we might call confirmation bias at scale. Once the narrative of Christian persecution took hold in certain circles, every piece of evidence that supported it got amplified, while contradictory evidence got ignored or dismissed. This is how complex conflicts get oversimplified. And it's dangerous, because policy decisions based on oversimplified narratives can make situations worse, not better. Alright, let's zoom out and look at the bigger picture. Because this crisis isn't just about Nigeria and the US, it has implications that ripple across continents and could reshape international relations for years to come. First, let's talk about African sovereignty. Nigeria is not some small, weak nation that can be easily pushed around. It's Africa's largest economy, bigger than South Africa. It has a population of over 200 million. It has significant military capabilities and regional influence. When the U.S. threatens military intervention against Nigeria, every other African nation is watching. And they're asking, if this can happen to Nigeria, could it happen to us? This raises fundamental questions about post-colonial power dynamics and whether African nations are truly sovereign or still subject to Western intervention at will. Second, there's the weaponization of aid. The U.S. provides over $1 billion annually to Nigeria in various forms of assistance. Much of this goes toward fighting the very terrorism Trump claims Nigeria isn't addressing. Now imagine you're Nigeria. The U.S. says you're not fighting terrorism effectively, then threatens to cut the funding that helps you fight terrorism. It's a catch-22. And it raises a bigger question. Is aid genuine assistance or a tool of political leverage? If the U.S. cuts aid to Nigeria, several things could happen. Nigeria's counterterrorism efforts could be weakened, making the security situation worse. Nigeria could turn to other global powers. China and Russia are already significant investors in Africa and would likely be happy to fill the void. And other African nations might decide that accepting U.S. aid means accepting U.S. control over their domestic affairs. Third, there's the question of U.S. credibility on human rights. For decades, the United States has positioned itself as a global defender of human rights and democratic values. But when the U.S. threatens intervention based on what many experts say is a mischaracterization of the facts, it undermines that moral authority. How can the U.S. call out actual human rights violations in China, Myanmar, or elsewhere if its own interventions are based on flawed premises. Other nations will point to Nigeria and say, "You can't be trusted to assess situations accurately." Fourth, there's the terrorism angle that's often overlooked. Boko Haram and ISWAP aren't just Nigerian problems, they're part of a broader network of jihadist groups that threaten global security. Destabilizing Nigeria's government or weakening its military capacity doesn't hurt these groups. It helps them. These organizations operate across borders in the Sahel region. They're linked to Al-Qaeda and ISIS affiliates. Defeating them requires strong, stable governments with effective militaries. Threatening to cut off support to Nigeria's military in the name of protecting Christians could actually result in more Christians and Muslims being killed. So let's bring this all together. What have we learned from this deep dive into the Nigeria-US crisis? Nigeria is facing a genuine, serious, multifaceted security crisis that's killing people from all communities and faiths. The causes are complex: terrorism, criminality, resource scarcity, governance challenges, poverty, and climate change all play roles. President Trump's characterization of this as Christian genocide doesn't match what's actually happening on the ground. Both Muslims and Christians are victims. Both need protection. Both deserve international attention and support. Threatening military intervention based on an oversimplified narrative isn't just unhelpful, it's potentially dangerous. It could weaken efforts to combat terrorism, damage international alliances, and set dangerous precedents for sovereignty and intervention. What Nigeria needs is partnership, not threats. Investment in development and security, not withdrawal of support. Understanding of complexity, not political oversimplification. This crisis reminds us why getting the facts right matters, why understanding context is crucial, and why international relations can't be reduced to simple good versus evil narratives. What do you think? Should the US be threatening Nigeria? Is there another perspective we should consider? Let me know in the comments below. And if you made it this far, thank you for taking the time to really understand this complex situation. Hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next video.